It really pulls you out of the movie, you know, when you can't see the star of the movie driving the damn car. And I just knew that Nick was a car buff. I thought that was a plus because I suspected he could really drive a car.
Bang, bang, cowboys in India.
Nick really was into it. He's a big car enthusiast himself, and he's got the Lamborghinis, the Labos, he's got the Ferraris. So he was really into it.
I just knew that Nick would be able to do it, and sure enough, and he got behind the wheel of that car and scared the shit out of everybody. That's him doing all these 180s and 360s and driving down the riverbed. I mean, he does most of his own stunts, so it just makes all the difference in the world to see him behind the wheel and see the buildings going by and see police cars swerving behind him, as opposed to the sort of green screen thing where somebody's rocking the car and the guy's sitting over the sandwich, you know.
If Nick wanted to do it, you'd have to drag him out with a crane to get him out of that car.
The cars are a handful alone, without any cameras on them. Then you add, 200 to 300 pounds of camera weight, and then you add the visibility factor of the lighting, lights in the eyes, or the obstruction value of where they have these cameras mounted. Not only that, but to act and perform on camera. And I can't tell him enough how well he did in driving because of how difficult it is to deal with all those elements.
There was a lot of sweaty palms on the set when he would do a very dangerous stunt. But he was so good that I kind of relaxed a little bit. The studio wasn't happy, nor was the insurance company.
Great. Very good.
We sent Nick to Bob Bondurant's race car driving school in Phoenix. He went to Willow Springs. He went out to a school out in Camarillo called Bobby Orr's Stunt Driving School, which taught him the physical aspects of how to do the stunt type driving along with the race car driving. It's the homework that you do ahead of time, and it takes some of the danger out of play.
I really enjoyed the race car driving school, and that was a whole other thing, which I went on to pursue a little bit more on my own now as well.
We went to learn the parameters of driving, not just for sense of speed, but why you take a turn, why you hit the apex at a certain point. So all those elements really intrigued him.
I can drive pretty well, especially since I went to this school. I'm really feeling like I can connect with the automobile.
We also trained Angelina Jolie to drive.
I don't know what I was doing. I was playing. I was in some car that in first gear was like 45 miles an hour. Just insane. He had these cones, and I kept going, and he said, just use the engine. Go one with the car. You point, you shoot, you point, you shoot, you point, you shoot. And then suddenly on my own, I'm driving my car around the hills going, ooh, point, shoot, point, shoot. I'm like losing my mind. I'm sure I'm gonna get arrested.
What we try to teach is controlled uncontrollability. We want to slide, we want to spin, we want to look like it's right on the edge, and this is how a good stunt driver can make it look, and yet inside the car, they're hardly doing anything. So there's a lot more to it than just jumping in the car and grabbing an e-brake and turning around.
Ooh, you want to get crazy with me?
I took a couple of day-long sessions with him in which we did 180-degree turns, stopping on a dime and going through the slalom, and we did the whole kind of gamut. It's been interesting dealing with this piece of machinery and attempting to get it to do what you want it to do.
I don't mind being in a car when it's not crashing into movable objects.
Jesus! Keep your pants on.
Other than that, it's pretty good.
Being actors, they can focus on a scene, but to focus on the action, sometimes that's not a pivotal part for them. But for this film, it was, and they had to really concentrate.
Come on!
I liked cars in a sort of testosterone, go fast sense, but now it's kind of a testosterone, go faster thing.
What the hell's the matter with you? Come on!
Hey, someone's stealing the car!
I did some cool stunt driving. I stole this Navigator, and I had to plow it over a lawn and do like a S-turn and skid out. That's some fun.
We're driving down and the police come up, so Sphinx ain't stopping for the police, and he smashes this police car all the way down the big spiral car park. It's a great scene.
Use the brakes! I am!
We was doing all the special effects, and my foot was off the pedal, so I said, shall I give it a little bit, And the back of the police car smashed away to the side of the pillar and everything, which weren't really supposed to happen. But it was good. I mean, my adrenaline was going, and I jumped out, and, I had a crack with a stuntman in the other thing. I said, yeah, that'll teach you.
We lost a few BMWs at 60,000 a crack and stuff like that, but they all look pretty convincing behind the wheel. when you can actually feature the actors driving these vehicles along with the stunt people bringing their end of it to the table, which is, you know, the dangerous stuff and the hairy stuff and the crashes. When you can marry those and they feel seamless, I think it's the best of both worlds.
There she is. Yep. There's Eleanor.
Eleanor's Memphis' nemesis. It's a car that he's been trying to steal ever since he began stealing cars. And unfortunately for Memphis, it's on the list of cars that have to be stolen. It's an American classic.
We're gonna get through this.
It's an enormously fast car. It's a very rare car. And it's a very sexy looking car. Those are all things we wanted.
So what it comes down to is this culmination of the final car in the film that has to be stolen, and he's got it. And now it's like the heat's on because it's the last car.
All right, easy way the hard way, Rains. Easy way the hard way.
Once you say, well, let's start in the city, then you look for the opportunities and the obstacles you're going to encounter naturally when you're shooting in the city.
That sign said do not enter.
Yeah, you noticed, huh?
Jesus!
Keep your pants on.
Tried to steer clear of the little old ladies crossing the street, the guys with the big picture windows. So organically, it just became hairy turns against red lights, about going counter to traffic that's coming your way, about encountering police who are sort of closing in on the chase from left, right, and center and behind you. All of it was done on location. That was a necessity. And as we looked around the city, we saw an alleyway we liked, and what if he gets blocked and stops just a few feet from that garbage truck? Now he has to go backwards, and everybody goes, oh yeah, well, that's kind of good. And then the thinking was, Castlebeck is behind him, not that far. We wanted to suggest that these two guys are sort of going head to head as if it were a game of chicken. But all of a sudden, at the last moment, you see that he swings into this parking garage. So we said, okay, he'll go backwards through the parking garage. He'll back out onto Main Street backwards.
That particular sequence, we had somewhere upwards of 20 different vehicles that were actual stunt vehicles, and then precision drivers on top of that.
Like sheet metal you're driving around, so it had to be choreographed and rehearsed and practiced.
As the porch comes out, this car here will kind of do a little swerve, maybe that way like that, kind of slide to a stop.
Chuck Pacherny and Johnny Martin, both their contribution was invaluable.
It comes down to your stunt coordinator and your AD and your director working in conjunction with one another to make sure that everything they do is well rehearsed. There's no oops or uh-ohs in there.
My whole philosophy was the audience encounters these things as the driver does. There wasn't going to be any sort of foreshadowing, or telegraphing of what was coming around the bend.
For the bus crash, we deliberately set it up so there was no setup on film that you knew this was going to happen. We had the different intercuts of the lead up to it with Nick and the stunt driver driving down the alleyway. Then we see a POV from the police car's angle as Nick goes through. Then we intercut to the actual crash. The police car was put on what they call a 2-to-1 cable. We had a cable from the bus to the police car with a pulley in the street. So if the bus was traveling 30, that meant the police car was doing 60. It's a double the speed type of thing. So the bus was actually pulling the police car for the impact. That way we knew it was going to happen in the exact same spot. So it enabled Dominic to put his cameras in a position to capture everything on film.
Then I segued from there to a river basin, and that's when we thought we'd bring the helicopter in to pursue him.
Air 1, we're over the pursuit.
We took liberties there, because ordinarily what would happen would be with the chopper, we'd just sort of spot the little sort of ant of a vehicle, in the basin, but it wouldn't have been too terribly exciting to keep the helicopter at 500 feet, so we brought it down to about 20 feet. The pilots were terrific, and it was a little hairy because they had to come in under a lot of wires. And actually, if you notice, they were traveling under the overpasses as well. So it took a little coordinating, but that was the only way to sort of keep the choppers in the frame.
Suspect has increased speed to 120.
The thinking was, let's have Nick hit the nitrous switch and really sort of kick the car into gear and get going, simulating 100, 120 miles an hour. But when we were shooting down in the river basin, it was flooded, and it was very dangerous down there. And so the drivers couldn't actually go more than 65, 70 miles an hour, so we ended up under cranking the cameras. Normal speed, normal frame rate is 24 frames a second, so if you're shooting at 16 frames a second, when it's played back in the theater, its increased speed is about 40% faster.
You have to make the audience believe they're actually living that movie, that they're actually going, 100 miles an hour. We want to make you feel like you're there.
He's gone.
The Naval Yard was actually a naval yard in San Pedro, and it was defunct. They were tearing it down. And so you go to the Naval Yard and you just sort of say, okay, what have we done so far? So far we've seen police cars chase them. We've seen people scattering, we encountered a bus, but this was an opportunity to just up the scale. Everything at the Naval Yard was huge. So we just said, well, what are the biggest industrial strength vehicles we could encounter? And so one of the ideas was that Nick goes up a ramp and can't see that there's a dozer coming on the upper level. He goes airborne and lands and is able to turn and swerve out of the way of it. The police cars that followed him didn't have that luxury.
You always want to push it as far as you can within safety limits, so you want to make something exciting that doesn't get anybody hurt, which, knock on wood, we did.
I put some ramps down for the police car to get some lift off of the ramp to put it into the bucket where we wanted. We gave him about 6 feet of lift, and he crashed head-on into the bucket. The police car was traveling about 30 miles an hour for the impact, so it was a pretty substantial hit. I put some tires in the bucket itself to kind of cushion the blow.
And so that became an element. And what if they're tearing it down and loading stuff up, what could they be taking away from the site? What if somebody was loading big canisters and you got freaked and one of them fell and hit the ground? Would it just sit there, or what if it didn't sit there? The canister sequence was an easy thing to sort of conceive. We came up with it over lunch, and then it actually turned out to be days and days and days of shooting to actually accomplish it. It was actually launched through the wall. Those were all actually real canisters just being fired with air cannons. It didn't have gas spewing out of it that was propelling it around the pier. It was just a canister, and all of the gas effects were created in post by Secret Lab. In some of the shots, the canister is rigged to wires and just pulled with very strong motors.
We did a lot of stuff live on set with special effects, standing in front of the police cars, but a lot of it was staged and done through visual effects to give us the preciseness of it and the impacts where we wanted them.
It's not physically possible to snap it with the cable this way and snap it back another direction, so whenever it's ricocheting off things, it's a CGI canister. The wrecking ball was actually simpler to do than the canister sequence because it was just a moment in time. We just brought the cranes and the wrecking balls to the location, built our own wall that was partially torn down already, and then we had shots where Nick was driving his car point of view. Of course, there wasn't a wrecking ball on there because there was only one Nick Cage, so in those shots, the cable and the wrecking ball are CGI, and they're created, in post via Secret Lab.
We intercut back to the real wrecking ball for the impact. It was an unmanned vehicle with a dummy in the car. So the wrecking ball actually made impact with the truck.
In other angles, the police car was actually rigged via cable to be pulled through the wall. The wall was pre-scored, and then the moment where the wrecking ball hits it, it appears to be moving because it's cut very well.
It takes, a couple of takes to get it exactly right when you're dealing with mechanics, but on the third take, we nailed it right where Dominic wanted it.
So I knew we had to have a big payoff, so it went from the Naval Yard and ended up on a bridge with an accident and him having to make a jump. So we just had to find the biggest, best bridge, in Southern California and beg people to let us shut it down for a few days. Fortunately, they did, or we wouldn't have had a payoff. We'd still be looking for a bridge. The Vincent Thomas Bridge had never been shut down. It's one of two ways into Long Beach, and when you shut it down, the people who live there get very pissed off. And so it was a hairy situation.
There he is, there he is. Get out of the car, man!
The big jump was done in a variety of different cuts. We did a lead-up version of Nick kind of stalled there, thinking of what he's going to do, contemplating, then his approach to the ramp once he makes his decision to jump the accident scene. We cut from there to the actual loading truck and jumping a short distance off of that.
It only goes about 50 feet or so, and it lands into a wall of cardboard boxes that they build about 10 feet high and 100 feet long to just catch the vehicle.
Then we used a computer graphic design shot of the car for the long travel through the air, seeing the bridge, seeing the scope of the height of the bridge, all of that stuff.
Whenever it was traveling over people, those were all CGI created automobiles because it was too dangerous to actually shoot separate pieces of a real launch car.
Action. Making the run to the ramp, and we've hit the ramp. We're airborne.
We wanted to tie a couple of shots of Nick into that sequence so that it wasn't just sheet metal, you know, flying through the air. And so what we did was we just took Nick and the vehicle, put a green screen behind him, and he just sort of acted it out as I talked him through it.
What, huh?
So we had Nick on the ground reacting as if he were airborne, and then plates were shot on the bridge of cameras moving past the girders, etc., to simulate what was behind him when he was airborne. And where the green screen canvas was, Secret Lab replaced that with a background plate in post-production. And so it appears that the background's moving behind him and he's actually airborne. The landing is real. That's actually a stunt driver taking off of an extended ramp and landing from a 25-foot height or so. They put incredibly strong shocks in there, and he actually does the landing. That's real.
Dominic Sena is a real artist. He's a visual artist. He's brilliant at what he does, and he's got a very, very exciting car chase.
On the whole, I'm pretty happy with the chase. I wanted to give the audience a ride. You know, I wanted them to be behind the wheel. I wanted them to sort of experience it as Nick was experiencing it, which I think works pretty well. I think it's fun, and I think it's a nice payoff. It was a lot of work, I know that.